Yeah, as we have already heard in many presentations today, as 5G offers a lot of opportunities, not only security risks, but a lot of opportunities for industry. And in some applications, however, it's not only necessary to set up a private network. We already heard about the difference of public networks and private networks. The private networks, I'm sure you already know, are the most interesting for a lot of companies. These private networks need a lot of, let's say, they are very fixed in one place. If you have a construction site or something, then you have your private network. But what if your production site is moving, like it's in some cases, like for example in agriculture, for example, or when you think about some pop-up events or something, then your private network should move. And this is not today, right now, it's not possible. The experts say it's a nomadic, you need a nomadic 5G network. And that is a very, very hot topic, not only in the regulation, but also under experts and how to get it, what is coming along with installing a nomadic network. It's a very hot topic, and I'm very happy to have the experts to discuss it. You see, I'm not a really expert here, but I'm very happy to have Professor Dr. Thomas Magedans with me. Thomas, come to me and help me here on stage. Thomas has already been here on stage, and he's a professor at TU Berlin and strategic advisor of Uniberg.
Yes.
Yeah. And you are an expert in nomadic campus networks, or you have the experts with you, or both?
Both.
Both. Perfect.
They are more and more experts.
Then I'm very glad to hand the topic of nomadic 5G networks over to you, and I'm very happy to learn about what the obstacles are we have to overcome there.
Okay.
The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so to say, my home turf for today. But honestly, let's say I want to do this panel not alone, so I would really like to ask all panelists to come and join me on the stage, and then we go step by step through these distinguished gentlemen here and their expertise in order to discuss the topic. So, and ladies and gentlemen, we are addressing a very hot topic, in my opinion. Although we might say it's a kind of niche market. Is it really a niche market? We will see during this panel. And as we already have heard, there is a lot of hype about non-public networks. We see a lot of momentum due to the fact that we have private frequencies here. In Germany, we see that private spectrum is becoming available at other places, typically for given locations. But there are some applications which are not necessarily stick to one single location during their lifetime. And this is particularly a challenging area, and this is the term nomadicity. We are talking about networks may move during their lifetime, and we will learn in the course of the panel that also this lifetime might be quite dynamic. So it's my honor to welcome here on stage 4 gentlemen with different backgrounds. On the one hand, we have academia represented here by Professor Hans Schotten, who is leading the DFKI Institute in Kaiserslautern, but also has a chair at the RUPT. But he will tell you more about this. Then we look at some smaller players who might be needed in order to build up these infrastructures. We have heard already that integrators are becoming quite important for non-public networks, and so it's my great pleasure to welcome on stage Mr. Andreas Möller from Uniberg GmbH. Then we have a big player, so a network operator, and I welcome to stage Dr. Muslim Elkotop from Vodafone. And last but not least, of course, we also have to look a little bit on the vendor side, and it's here my pleasure to introduce to you Afif Ozarian from Errichtung. So before we go deeper into the subject area, what are these nomadic networks and what makes them very specific? I would like, because we have some spare time, so we have some luxury, and would like to ask every one of you, what are you doing in the context of 5G and nomadic networks? Just to give us a little bit of background why you are sitting here on this stage. So, and let's go just around the chain. Hans, the floor is with you.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you very much for the introduction. One small comment on this. I'm actually leading the Department for Intelligent Networks in DFKI, which is a much larger organization. Okay, nomadic networks, I guess it might be helpful to explain what it is before starting to talk about the application. So it is not a network or base stations that are moving around while they are transmitting information. So it is a network that is typically built in a car and that can move from one place to the other. So you have a base station, but it's not transmitting while it's moving, but it's always static when it is transmitting, but it can be anywhere. You can move it with a car somewhere. That makes a big difference, because a base station that during transmission is moving is indeed very tricky, because you have interference that is always changing, while a base station that you can drive somewhere is more realistic. And when we started to talk about this vision, already this idea of having a base station mounted to a car that we will drive somewhere was a nightmare for regulation. So the current idea is, of course, based on a weeks or months duration of paperwork for setting up a base station, while we say we have the idea that for agriculture, for construction work, for fire departments, we just mount the base station to a car, drive to a certain place, set it up, and immediately start to use it at a new place. Which actually means we don't have the time to talk to the regulator and do paperwork. We have to do this electronically.
But Hans, I know you're academic like me. Before you now do the whole course on nomadic networks, let's say we have still the panel ahead of us, so let's go deeper into the one or the other subject. But what is your relationship to this topic in principle?
We started to work on this several years ago, and we actually implemented it. So we have now 4 years of experience with working with this in cars, and we are mainly using it for agriculture, for automation, so for robots, control of robots, and for measurement campaigns, and to be frank, for demonstration, so for fairs.
Okay, so Andreas, what brings you to nomadic networks?
Uniberg is a system integrator and a solution provider, and tries to bring in innovation and 5G technologies. And use cases we are working on are construction sites. Construction sites can be daily construction sites, can be monthly, or can be large or long-term construction sites. And also the agriculture use cases which you mentioned is quite similar to the construction use case. And we also work in an interest group with the headed by the Fraunhofer IIS, trying to bring in nomadic 5G infrastructures into the regulation.
Okay, Muslim.
Yeah.
What is your take on 5G and?
Yeah, my take is that after being a say, leading player in providing private networks for industry, in the industry spectrum, which have all a fixed backhaul. It is time also to move a step forward and have networks that can be spontaneously set up or solve an emergency cause to react faster. And that's why nomadic networks, which are networks with, if you want, a moving backhaul along, are a response to the needs of current industry, like agriculture, like we heard, also for emergency and for other use cases. So it's time to technologically look at this thing and then see what can regulation do to support the bootstrapping of such networks on my side.
Okay, and Afif, what is the Ericsson and your role in this context?
You brought me to this panel, isn't it? No, I mean, maybe go back to Hans. You made a definition as if, you know, it's universal one, and there is no actually universal definition for nomadic network. And I would even challenge, I mean, it's nomadic. Maybe I would call it, is it temporary, you know, network? And which dimension is most important? Is it the time dimension is more important than the distance one? It depends, isn't it? What the use cases at the end. So I would say first, there is no consensus what is really a nomadic network. And we from Ericsson, if you would like simplify it, if it's temporary network, then we have done it, for example, for natural disasters. If there is earthquake, etc., wars, setting up temporary network, and with the help, it could be MNOs. We have done it in many countries. I can come back to it later on to exemplify more.
Okay, thank you, Afif, for this. And I think what Afif brought in is a very interesting additional dimension to which Hans has said before, which was this kind of the moving base station, or to bring a base station at a specific point in time, defining this kind of nomadicity. So therefore, let's just try to recap a little bit. There is no real definition of a nomadic network, which I guess is true because we don't see it at this point in time in 3GPP as a clear definition. But there is probably a kind of, let's call it common sense, or some kind of assumption due to the fact that we see more and more projects being addressed here, at least in Germany, with different use cases. So therefore, what, again, asking whoever wants to answer, are these different potential dimensions of what makes a nomadic network? So who wants to add something to this? Maybe you, even Hans, because you started to, in my opinion, limit it a little bit to this. We put it in a car. Is this a prerequisite that I need a vehicle to mount it, or is the scope maybe a little bit broader?
No, the mounting it to a car is just an example that was used in the beginning, and it was mainly driven by base stations at this time being still very expensive, so that it was a valuable good that you tried to bring at different places. Of course, when you think about what it is when you go with a car somewhere and you only switch it on there, then you end up with Afif's definition. Yeah, at the location where it's used, it's a temporary network. Yeah, but as you said, there is no definition because neither standardization nor regulation is currently working on this, so there is no need yet for something. I think there's an agreement from a radiation point of view. It is something that at a certain place temporarily is transmitting, and whether it was brought there by car before or by whatever doesn't matter. And it's not a movable base station, so it's not a base station that is transmitting while it is moved, because this is, technically speaking, definitely something else, with one exception where people don't agree. What is with drone-mounted or LEO-mounted base station? Because then, of course, what is movable is a difference, but that is typically today seen as a third category. So it's neither moving nor nomadic. it's these non-terrestrial networks.
Okay, so, but Andreas, you moved your arm. There's something you want to add to this?
I just wanted to add the sentence which you just mentioned, LEO-oriented drones, which are providing 5G networks to the users, like say robots, trying to do harvesting in forests or similar use cases are an exceptional use case in this, and must be looked from the regulator perspective in also as a nomadic use case, I would say.
We do not yet know how they will
Okay,
handle this.
so not everyone has to say something to a given point, but do you want to say something, then feel free.
Yeah. So I largely agree with what my fellow panelists said, but for me, the key in nomadic networks is how fast are they, let's say, bootstrapped, coming into shape, and how long do they exist, and how are they dismantled. So for a regular, let's say, 5G mobile private network, you plan to automate a factory with 5G like we do with our enterprise customers. So you plan the site, you do the surveying, you do the planning, the provisioning, and then you build and design your network. But if it's a nomadic one, maybe it's a military application or agriculture, you may have limited time to build it. So it has to be very quickly bootstrapped. And that's a challenge. And then what can you get out of that as a result is then the interesting thing that should be a balance between the purpose of this nomadic network and the ability to achieve this purpose in this short time that you get, which is also varying, but it's usually limited. So that's the challenge that I see here.
Okay, so this means we at least could say it is something which has an unknown location. It has, let's say, not unknown, but not predictable location until the decision is there. We need a nomadic network. We have a specific time frame or duration it should exist. And the question is, what is the time frame to plan it? And this brings us maybe also a little bit to the use cases, just to think a little bit. We have heard a little bit of some words. Agriculture was already mentioned, but maybe we can just try to identify, are there specific use case categories where this type of network is becoming quite important and fundamental? So what is your thinking about these use cases which are potentially driving the adoption or the need for nomadic networks?
I can.
Okay, Afif was still for a while, so Afif, go on.
Why use cases are important? As a matter of fact, in order to define what is a nomadic network, maybe we should discuss what are we trying to solve, isn't it, first? And I'm afraid, when we were talking about 5G in the past, we tried to solve, the ultra latency, and then we have to figure out what is the use case. And I guess it's better, to find the use case and then to build the solution for it. And I can see diverse solution. I mean, Andreas, you spoke about construction, hence agriculture, natural disasters. Muslim, you also mentioned defense, which I call it human disaster, because national disaster is basically what, natural disaster is what's nature, disaster, but we initiate usually the disaster, isn't it? Out what we do. And then entertainment, we should not forget entertainment. It could be education, and maybe all these do have different requirements. Does it mean it's the same nomadic network at the end, or the same temporary network we have to set up? And that's why it's important. I mean, if we agree, are these the main justification for such a network, or have we forgot something more?
I would say rescue service, for example, is something which we didn't mention yet. So rescue services may want to inspect before they are on site with 5G technology, where the what they have to equip and what kind of disasters they may find. There's also use cases. I would also differentiate the use cases in agriculture, because let's say forest is a different agriculture than, let's say, the classical harvesting of fields is, and that therefore I would differentiate those as well. I mean, there's also classification on technology. So what kind of parameters do we differentiate those kind of use cases? Each of the use cases may have different kind of requirements towards licensing, towards technology being used, like drones, like transporters, like the coverage area, and those need to be defined. And I guess there's work to be done from vendors towards, let's say, regulators, towards the system integrators for providing system. I would call also the service providers, mobile service providers, as system integrators, because they would also provide solutions in this case. So there's different kind of demands on those kind of requirements.
Wanted to add, first of all, agree with Afif that it should be use case driven, the design. And then, of course, there is no one nomadic network. It depends on the use case type. So we have heard so far event-based. In German, it's called Eventgeschäft. So media, entertainment, or any big event that requires spontaneous setup of a large, let's say, capacity or provisioning of resources. A nomadic network of this type could be an answer for this. There are some models, but they are not yet that, let's say, matured. And at the same time, I agree that regulators should also help a bit to facilitate and to lower the bar on setting up nomadic networks. But it's also all the critical stakeholders, so vendors, yes, integrators, also operators, because currently private networks, there is no roaming into these networks. And if you open your private networks for roaming in a nomadic way, it will be, let's say, out of control resource situations. So that's why you have to, let's say, allow some degree of nomadic networks, but you still have to have some provisioning, some view of the resource, especially when it comes to operator, let's say, frequencies where you operate, and also on the setups that you have there. So it's a bit of a balance act.
Yeah, I got your point. Andreas, you immediately wanted to add something?
Yeah, there's also the question on policies. First in, first out. I mean, who comes first, wants to use this 5G, private 5G infrastructure on this side, and then the second guy come at the same time. And the accuracy of, let's say, coverage is sometimes a problem, so that you may not, if two farmers working at the same time, which is quite possible, nearby each other with their own private 5G infrastructure, they may interfere between each other. And if the full band is given to both, and if the first is licensing the coverage, and the second wants to use it on his ground, not on the other ground, they may both interfere between each other, and they may not be able to solve the problem.
There should be a policy to balance these users,
Yes.
or a way to provision to cover their needs. So it should be
sharing the
sharing
the frequencies or similar things.
And, yes.
Okay, so maybe it's time for a short summary of what we have heard, in the sense, because we are now already in a kind of spectrum discussion, which is natural and probably one of the biggest challenges, I guess, when we talk about nomadic networks, because I guess from a technology point of view, to set up a network which might be portable, being it in a truck, being it in something which could fly and be brought somewhere, I think it is important to understand what is the use case and what is the target. So what I want to say is there's probably a big difference whether I want to support a construction site, which is basically a more private environment or enterprise environment in an area where there is no connectivity. And I think we talk about nomadic networks in a context, we want to bring 5G connectivity or very advanced connectivity to a place or location where we don't have connectivity, and we want to interconnect things and humans for specific purposes. This might be an enterprise purpose, or it might be a public purpose. Because when we talk about some festivals taking place in Nirvana, and we want not only to connect the TV systems and microphone systems, but also want to allow people to stream up, down something from the event, it's probably different. And this is even different from a disaster situation where we talk about a kind of, this is a question for national security, where we are probably not even using private spectrum, but dedicated public spectrum. So let's therefore just go a little bit deeper into the spectrum thing, because I know that you, Andreas, and some of the people sitting here on the panel are also in this project. There are some ideas to cope with what do we need in order to support nomadic networks in terms of dynamic spectrum assignment. How can we cope it? Because Andreas, you mentioned already, I may want to go for a private network, for a nomadic network in a given area, but this frequency spectrum is already gone because someone is there. And so what do we really need, and what is our wish list to the regulator in order to cope with this? Everyone is free to answer, but Andreas has probably also some answer to this.
Yep. Let's say two answers on this. One is, for sure, the regulator must allow licenses within a few minutes, maybe seconds, or must permit those kind of requests within a specific time. This is quite important in order to provide a very short time or very urgent request for licensing.
Okay, for these public safety situations.
For example, but maybe public safety is not a good example, because such regulation may be done with generic answers. So let's say public safety is always priority and may get a specific frequency range, which does not need to have regulations at all. But let's say to have a clear information how long it takes for licensing for the application, as well as the permission of the application to be processed by the regulator. And the second is short time in the way of, I need it only for 2 days or 5 days or half a year or a month. So the time range will vary in the future. And there's also, let's say, the coverage area. Is it really deterministic? I'm doubting that it is really deterministic. So there's a, let's say, the area must have variances and cannot be limited to, let's say, the borders of your own property.
So, Muslim, do you think, because you are owning spectrum, right, and you know where this spectrum is available, for instance, in a given country, so is it for you a problem to support a nomadic network because you are sitting on the spectrum and you can deprioritize event maybe? Or do you think there is a need for something of extra spectrum in order to particularly support these scenarios?
Very good question, Thomas. So this 100 megahertz spectrum, which is from 3.6 to 3.7 gigahertz in our case, it can do quite something, but the issue is that you can do quite some use cases. There are already some, let's say, licensed private networks from the government to really use, let's say, these, it's all granted by licensing. So there's quite some already approved companies which can run their private networks based on this industry frequency. But what I see with nomadic networks is that when these things start to appear on a spontaneous or on a very short span of a grant of a license, you should still maintain some control, because even though 100 megahertz seems like quite a spectrum, it is limited. So if you have suddenly 1,000 networks popping up, it can create quite some chaos. So currently, private networks, you can have no, let's say, roaming in, but you can have roaming out. So if you have a nomadic network, you can have roaming in and out. And if you have no control over the number or the quantity of these cells that are there, it will be hard to manage your resources to guarantee the quality that you want to provide to your farmers, citizens, whatever. So to manage this in a balanced way, I think that you have to have some kind of control and to have a limited licensing, but which would be fast, and to really prioritize the important cases that really need these nomadic networks. And this could be a way forward, but still some steps to go there.
Hans, you seem to be one of these pioneers playing around with providing nomadic networks, or at least testing nomadic network concepts. So what is your take on this? So I know, at least in the past, you mentioned Versuchsfunklizenz in order to get something done, but what would be needed in order to, let's say, what are your experiences and what is your suggestion for the future to automate this maybe?
So when nomadic, non-public networks really become frequently used, then it might be good to have the process automated. Today it's not necessary, because the support by the German national regulator is extremely good and fast, so that even when you do it in the traditional way, calling them and asking for the permit, you get it very quickly. There are very few use cases and scenarios where we today really could imagine to have a problem. Because typically, of course, as already mentioned, nomadic networks are used in order to bring coverage to areas where we don't have coverage, which actually means we also don't have a conflict with licenses and spectrum and interference in most cases. So typically, people are happy to get coverage. Where could potentially a conflict being set up? When you already have a big non-public network installed, and you have a scenario where you would like to bring a new network in. Yeah, this is the only case that we found where that might be relevant is when you have, for example, a factory non-public network, and you suddenly have a case of emergency, yeah, and you have first helpers that bring their network and need the same spectrum. Then, of course, the campus network would have to be switched off in order to allow the emergency departments to work. And the other scenario is PMSE, so program making special events. When they move somewhere, there is a high probability that others also want to move there in order to make a program of a special event. And then you might have a conflict of several parties at the same time requesting the same spectrum. And we need a time of a kind of a sharing strategy to be developed by the national regulator that allows to handle this conflict. All other cases are typically comparable easy. So when we talk about agriculture, yeah, I have never seen a case where it's really a conflict in the agriculture campaigns, because it's often anyway coordinated. They are working with the same machines, etc., and the networks are mounted to machines. So in the forest construction work, you don't have coverage at all. Disaster relief, you are also happy to get any kind of coverage. So that I would say there is a certain risk that we talk too much about the regulation and make this so complex, complexity and problems that we typically don't have. That's better way to develop the use cases and see that the market is developing, and then hope that we can identify a very few cases where really the regulator need to jump in. Today it works pretty fine. Yeah, today it works pretty fine. Just the fire departments would request to get it in minutes, but typically today they get the license faster than the networks need to be set up. Yeah, because they need time to be set up, to be synchronized, etc. That takes more time than getting the spectrum allocated. So that I'm pretty much relaxed on this. We have not seen many problems up to now. And even the studies on potential use cases indicate there are only very few cases where we could expect to get problems.
Okay. Afif, what is your perception or your input when you look a little bit around the German space, look to Europe, maybe even look into the US? There's CBRS, there are other schemes in order to, let's say, provide spectrum for certain events. So is it true that we are happy with what Hans said? We can live with what we have? Do we need something else? What is your experience from the outside?
Maybe before tackling the spectrum, I guess first we need to ask ourselves, is there a business case, you know? And then secondly, even if the business case, let's look, you know, at the use cases and try to develop solutions. Because we have to look at the deployment model, and it's not necessarily, you know, needing, you know, more dedicated spectrum. It could be done in different means, isn't it? And I think that's why I would be cautious jumping immediately, like we have to regulate and allocate spectrum. We have first, you know, to see, is there a business case, how it can be done, how it can be resolved. And then I would like to also to add to the definition. For me, nomadic, whatever, you could have a network, and actually in some cases, like if we religious, for example, events, there are networks, but not enough, because suddenly, I mean, the number of people will be multiplied by a factor of 100. So you need to establish a temporary network, and this is also common. So, so that's why, I mean, we need to revise the definition and as well look at the deployment models, and then maybe also harmonize, because it's dangerous if now in Germany you say, okay, it's fantastic, let's do it, and then it's different from other countries. This could be a trap as well. And that's how I'm jumping into the future, into 6G, and then which frequency, because the EU, you know, currently is the EU Commission trying to harmonize, you know, some of the frequency, you know, bands for private or local. So let's, you know, do it step by step and first see if there is a case.
Okay, so this means let's go step by step, experience-driven, business case-driven on the one hand. On the other hand, you already mentioned a very toxic word, the 6G word, and there is quite of some discussion going on. We have just 1 minute left, so therefore I would just ask you a quick question. Do you believe that with this, what we currently have, we are happy with the dynamic spectrum or the spectrum we have, or do we need something more flexible also to cover these use cases in 6G? Yes or no, which gives everyone a statement. Do we need more flexibility in spectrum assignments in 6G?
Yes.
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 I don't know.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think it was a long day. I want to say thank you for the panelists to be here with us in these late hours of the day. It is a tricky topic. There is not an official white paper, but there's a study in German language being available for analyzing the needs for nomadic networks. If you're interested in this, you can approach me, Hans.
It's available in English now as well.
It's translated, super good. So now there was a working force group here in Germany looking at nomadic networks. And secondly, there's an interesting project looking into this automation of trying to assign more spontaneously network frequencies for private networks called ADIRI. website coming soon. So there is some groundwork taking place. Sorry for,
Yeah,
no, I see the
everything's like-
zero. I have to
That's
finish.
the last session for today, so if you have time, we can stay.
Okay.
But,
But that's it. So if you're
But
interested.
maybe there is one or the other question from the audience, because it's a very hot topic and we had a very good discussion here on stage, and maybe you want to add something, or if you have a question, or if it's a topic of what you have at home. No, that's not the case. So everybody is exhausted. Thank you very much, Thomas, for guiding through that very, minefield of
No, it isn't, but it is a hot topic for sure. And you see many movable networks here in this hall.
Yeah,
So there seems to be some kind of market.
and we will see where it leads. Maybe to 6th Street. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,